Go ahead and get started. So thank you all for being here. It's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight. My name is Kirsten Nauman, and I am the Prevention Coordinator for the town of Trumbull and TPOD, Trumbull's Prevention Partnership. I'm joined tonight by Melissa McGarry, who's Trumbull's Prevention Director. Some housekeeping before we begin. Tonight's presentation is part of our Let's Talk Mental Health Trumbull series, a virtual speakers series highlighting and demystifying topics, information, and resources around mental health. This session will be recorded and available on demand, along with recordings of previous webinars in the series on the TPOD website at www.tpod.org. I encourage you to register for our next webinar scheduled for Tuesday, February 25th from 7 to 8:30 p.m., a free film showing and panel discussion of screenagers under the influence to learn about the changing landscape of substances, how social media influences our teens, and how we can empower them to be healthy. If you have any questions during tonight's presentation, please type them in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to answer as many as possible at the end of the presentation. Now, I'm so pleased to welcome our speaker, Liz Jorgensen, to guide us through the rewarding but often challenging job of raising teenagers, especially boys. Liz has 30 years of experience in adolescent and adult psychotherapy and consulting, and is a nationally recognized expert in counseling, particularly in engaging resistant teens and motivating them to change. Since 2000, Liz has been the owner and director of Insight Counseling in Ridgefield. Welcome, Liz, and thank you so much for taking the time to be with us tonight.
Thank you. And I also want to mention I've been a consultant to Newport Healthcare for 12 years, and they're sponsoring my time this evening, which is very wonderful. And welcome all. And I just want to say I am very happy to be the mom of 4 grown children, 2 boys and 2 girls. So this is absolutely ridiculous, but I pretend that I have a little small study comparing boys and girls with only an N of 4, which of course is silly. But I want to just shout out to anybody who, because our kids were all grown and flown by the time COVID hit. Well, we had one in college still, the youngest. Oldest is 38, the youngest is now 26. And I worship you as parents and workers and community members taking care of kids at home. I remember saying to my husband a couple times during COVID lockdown, one of our sons who turned out fine, who I'm going to tell a couple funny stories about tonight, he was feral enough, like with all activities open when he was in high school. Like, I don't know what we would have done. Like, I don't know if I would have been able to get him to do screen school. Like, it's been rough, and there's an idea in Buddhism and also in a very, very popular type of therapy called dialectical behavioral therapy called radical acceptance. And what that means is it doesn't mean like saccharine, sweet, like kumbaya, I just love and accept everything. It's like certain things in our lives are difficult and stressful, and yet if we spend too much energy fighting them mentally, it expands on our suffering. So we could just choose to say like, hey, I have to radically accept, like I'm assuming some of you may have signed on to this webinar because your son, maybe is pushing your buttons and causing some difficulty in your life. But I think we just sort of all acknowledge like the last 4 years of parenting have been extra. They've been really extra. And you see, optimistically, I end there in 2024. So let's hope that stands. So what are we going to cover tonight? We're gonna talk about some specific risks that are going on with this younger age group. And I can't help but blend the data from like young teens up into young adulthood. And everything that I say to you tonight is based on research, but I'll let you know when it's anecdotal and emerging data versus, hard data. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about culture. As I get older and older, and I read more, as human beings, we all want to believe that we have a lot more free will than we actually do. It's a little spooky. Our brains make a lot of decisions for us. And we're all impacted by culture, probably a little bit more than we would want to admit. And young teenagers in general, but especially young boys, can be outsized impacted by culture. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how that's impacting all of us, culture, but especially young teenage boys. And then I'm going to talk to you a lot about healthy masculinity, because it really we spent a couple of decades being very, very worried about young girls and their self-esteem and them being involved in STEM and succeeding and, having equal rights and all that. And it's not that we left the boys behind, but there's a lot of social research, social psychology research showing that many men in general feel left behind by women's achievements. And, that's not a good petri dish to grow love and acceptance. And it really isn't really logical, but I'll get into how it's affecting some young men, and what we can do about it. Because, there is a difference in masculinity and femininity, and it's okay. And young men really do want male role models. Oh, I forgot to do my parenthetical warning that I will be using humor this evening to talk about teenagers. And I hope we can all have a little bit of a sense of humor. If you don't have a sense of humor, you should probably sign off, because I will definitely offend you. I might offend you anyway, even if you have a good sense of humor. And I am talking mostly tonight about cisgender boys, and I don't mean to leave any group out, but as a group, researchers look into different groups socially. And when we're looking at kind of the failure to launch and kind of the achievement malaise, we're looking a lot at boys who identify as masculine and cisgender. So I will be talking mostly about that cultural group. And we really need, as a generation, to figure out how to help young men and young women feel more hopeful and more motivated. I'm reading a great book right now. It's called Factfulness. I don't know if you've heard of it. And the author unfortunately passed away of cancer a couple years ago, but and I'm going to forget who wrote it now. I saw his TED Talk online and then bought his book. And basically, we are living in the best time to ever be a human being since the beginning of recorded history, right? You wouldn't know that by looking at the news and media, etc. But we really, as parents, got to stop doom scrolling ourselves and find ways to give hope and motivation to young people and help them understand how valuable they are and how really good things take time. And there's no such thing as an overnight success. There's no such thing as a completely independent success. These are myths that young people tend to get from our culture and our environment that can really then affect their self-esteem. And I'm going to specifically talk to you guys about a couple of things. I run a counseling practice, and with boys, we do see, if they go off the rails, we do see a lot of issues with excessive gaming and some gambling and some extreme avoidance. Okay, so those are the things we're going to cover. Now, if you don't know what this picture is from, it's a still from the movie Superbad, which was written by two of these three actors when they were actually teenagers, and they tweaked it in their 20s. And basically what's so hilarious about this movie is that these three friends, who are the characters in the movie, are straight-laced, all want to go to Ivy League school together, straight A's, etc. And they get in trouble and break several federal laws simply because the prettiest girls in school ask them to try to find alcohol. And it's really pretty funny. So I need you to know that some acting out and irrational behavior in teen boys and young men is normative, right? And if you're one of those rare people who never got in trouble in high school or college, I don't believe you, or you just didn't get caught. Most boys they're gonna push your buttons. They're gonna do at least a couple things or one thing that really shocks and surprises you. I have permission to tell a couple of, I think, very funny stories about my own sons, who are great men now. One son is a scientist. He's 30, just turned 36. The other is a businessman. He's 28. And they're great, great men, and helped us considerably take care of their elderly grandparents, two of whom have passed away now. But it's teenage boys. Boy, a couple times they did some super bad, stupid things, and basically didn't really shock me because this is what I do for a living. But I want to tell you a little bit first about the teenage brain, because boys and girls both have this problem. Their brains are rapidly developing from the time that puberty starts, which for boys is about 2 years after girls. So those of you who had a first child who was a girl, you've been spoiled, because developmentally, girls have, oh, believe me, their own set of challenges raising girls. I actually think it's harder to raise girls, in my opinion, because of what great liars they are, and a lot of the emotional turmoil they go through, and a lot of the social things going on with social media. But in any event, As soon as puberty hits, which on average age for boys is a full puberty is about 14. It's not as young as girls, which is about 12. The brain goes through a absolutely dramatic, intense second wave of development. I mean, the brain's been developing the child's whole life, but the first 5 years were the most intense time, the time that the brain went from the infant size, right, just large enough to be born, and grew to 3.5 pounds, which is the size that everybody's brain is. And then the brain is continuing to develop. Obviously, children are learning a lot from the age of 5 to puberty. But what happens that's pretty remarkable is the minute that puberty starts, the red area that the slide that you're looking at represents, it's called the limbic system. And that kind of lights up like a Christmas tree, if you will. And the limbic system is the seat of all emotions and instincts in the brain. And this is why you can have a very rational, I'll never forget my son, Timmy, before he hit puberty, he was very rational. He kept his room immaculate. He always wanted white sneakers and kept them clean. All of his sports equipment was like organized. He kind of had a little bit of an obsessive quality to him too. Like he would recopy his homework, and I'd say, "Tim, you're only in 4th grade. You don't need to recopy your homework." Well, puberty hit, and it was like all of those qualities kind of went out the window. And what'll happen is emotion will take over the brain, and it's not as simple as saying that the child loses reason, because of course they don't lose reason. It's just when reason and emotion clash, the emotion's going to win out. And at the same time that the limbic system kind of goes profusely online, what's happening at the top of the brain, which is called the neocortex. So that's the crinkles and the wrinkles in the brain there. That's where all the highest order developmental and neurological feats are accomplished. So where we believe personality is, where we believe spatial, verbal, nonverbal intelligences, the personality, the ability to inhibit one's impulses, et cetera, is all in the neocortex, the outside of the brain. And in teenagers, basically, they are making hundreds of millions of new connections at that neocortical level every week, every month. Their brain is just exploding, which is one of the reasons that teenagers are so fun and creative and spontaneous, and why they can run all the technology in your household and get very annoyed at you that you can't. I remember when my kids were home and I'd say, "Hey, can you fix this on the computer?" They'd go like this. And I'd be like, "Okay, slow it down, slow it down." And they'd be like, "Mom, pay attention." Right. And that's because their brain literally is faster than our brains. Their brains are literally able to absorb new language and new information faster. But there's this push and pull between the limbic system, that emotional percolator, and the slower development of the cortex. And right here at the forehead, so back to this guy, right here at the forehead of, so what did I just do? I went to the wrong one. It's between here and here. It's called the prefrontal cortex. That's the last area of the brain to fully develop, probably not developed until about the age of 25 or so. And wouldn't you know it, the prefrontal cortex is the seat of all the executive functions of the brain. So the ability to do logical analysis, to do time management well, to accurately predict the consequences of any given decision, to figure out the most important or essential part of an activity or project. Basically, the things that we need to be a fully functioning adult. And the prefrontal cortex is also the brake of the emotional brain. So the prefrontal cortex is what keeps you from being angry at your boss out loud, even though you're really annoyed at your boss, right? Or it keeps you from going to the worst case scenario when there's a disappointing piece of news that you receive, and you have to kind of keep pulling back and being like, "Nope, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Stock market goes up and down. It's going to be okay." Okay. And the limbic system, if you will, is the gas of the brain, the gas pedal. So the teenager's brain is being driven by this intense emotion at times, especially around issues related to peers and looking attractive and being socially attractive, not just to the opposite sex or whoever they're attracted to, but just to be like seen as a cool teammate or friend, etc. So you have this constant push-pull with the teen brain. The limbic system is saying, go, 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 go. It's the gas. It's like, go have fun, novel experiences, go learn a lot about the world. And then the prefrontal cortex is sometimes just offline, and you as a parent basically have to become the prefrontal cortex often for your child and say, no, not today, not yet, whatever. And I don't know if anybody here on here could relate, but 3 out of 4 of my teenagers, one had a relatively easy slide into adolescence. I mean, her personality still did change drastically, but a lot of kids' personalities change quite a bit when that limbic system takes over. And it can be kind of disorienting to be like, where's that kind, calm, younger child who kept their room clean? Now, I have good news for you. They're still in there. And in my case and our family, that we all came back to that. But the other interesting thing, I teach this same information to teenagers themselves. They get a little bit spooked about how emotional they can become when the limbic system takes over. They don't really like it either. They don't really understand why they're getting so intense all the time. And I was saying this before we went online, that one of the interesting pieces of data that's really coming out about why young boys or young men are struggling, maybe a little bit more than their female peers in many ways, is brain development in tweens and teen boys starts about 2 years later because of the puberty piece that I said to you before. And that creates a real social skills gap between the girls and the boys in any particular grade. And there's evidence that this gap even exists as young as age 5. And I know we have one November birthday, and I already knew he was not going to kindergarten. Turning 5 in November kept him. I had to pay for private kindergarten for a year. I think it made all the difference for him. But boys just are a little developmentally behind. Of course, everybody catches up, basically. But this really can put the boys at even more of a deficit of self-esteem, because, of course, even if parents say night and day and night, don't compare yourself to others, don't compare yourself to your sister. Yes, your sister was on a roll every quarter at the same age, whatever. You don't exactly want to tell a young man like, hey, you're 2 years developmentally behind brain wise, but that really truly is what we're looking at. And so sometimes a boy who was very organized when they were younger, they hit this patch and they look like they have ADHD or something else going on. And once in a while we have a late developing ADHD case, but a lot of times it's just the limbic system and the brain development. So, oh, by the way, these slides will be available to anybody who wants them through your hosts, Melissa and Kirsten, tonight. But this is the COVID States Project is actually a hyperlink on this, and it's very interesting to read it. And it's been expanded since I wrote this slide. Or actually, when you click on it, you go to the expansion. But basically, we are seeing about an 18-month to 2-year delay academically and also developmentally in kids that were in from like 4th grade on during COVID. So that would be your teenage sons. Now, the good news is the whole cohort experienced this setback together. So they're generally not comparing themselves to each other, but they could compare themselves to much older siblings or other people in the family. The other thing that's really spooky, and we've just seen it leveling off now, thank goodness, is we were already having an intense increase in anxiety and depression rates before COVID hit. And now really and truly, we're looking at about a 50% rate of what we would call diagnosable anxiety and depression. Not necessarily that all of those teenagers need like intensive help, but just, that they've had enough symptoms as to impact their functioning at times. And again, you're the generation of parents that's dealing with this. So that's why I was revering you in the beginning. So why do we think we were in the middle of this crisis even before COVID, right? What were the variables building up to this? Well, there's a lot of interrelated factors. I've spent a lot of time deep diving into all of this data. I subscribe to a lot of the top researchers in this, have written like Substacks, which are really very interesting. Diving into the variables of screen and technology impact, changes in culture, etc. So what we're looking at is, if you think about a pie of influence, like a pie chart, the most profound variables for young men right now are the same for teenage girls as well. It's the overall impact of technology, also the trickle down impact of adult stress and vulnerability during COVID, but even before that, the impact of some cultural expectations, and then of course COVID itself. So when variables are cultural, we can intervene, right? So if something's biological, we do know quite a bit of anxiety, depression, other mental illness has a strong biological risk, or you can, what do they call it? Oh gosh, I can't remember the research name. So you could be stacked for these different things genetically, and then you have to have enough stress in your life for the gene to express itself. Well, what we think is that because of all the variables and COVID coming in and affecting kids, that more young people who had maybe the genetic predisposition for anxiety and depression, the current culture has been stressful enough as to turn that gene on. And we do know, sadly, now we have enough data accumulating that we're seeing the impact of overparenting over the past 15 years or so, where parents tend to have a really hard time allowing kids to fail, allowing kids to make, obviously you don't want them to make bad decisions that could lead to severe injuries or fatalities or something. But a lot of parents are anxious. Like right before I signed on to the webinar tonight, I'm texting with a parent who can hear his son upset in his room. His son has had really bad like flu for a week, and something else happened, and he was having an argument with his girlfriend, and the dad wanted to jump into his room and make it okay. Now the son wasn't doing anything wrong. He could just hear him talking a little loudly to the girlfriend on the phone, and maybe like storming around a little, not breaking anything. And dad just wanted to go rescue him. So luckily I texted dad and said, no, remember, let him have his emotions. He's okay. He'll come and get you, and then you can have a decent conversation, but don't go in that room if he's pacing around having an argument with his girlfriend on the phone. So by overparenting, it's obviously parents always love their children. And listen, I would give my life in exchange for any one of my 4 children, even though they're adults. That's just what it is to be a parent, right? You would just give up your life for your child. It's really pretty crazy. But the problem of overparenting is we're always anticipating something that might ruffle our child or cause them pain or whatever. When, let's face it, as adults, I don't know about you, but a lot of my day is dealing with frustrations and problems and anticipating problems and trying to, correct them before they happen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what we've done in a way with the overparenting, and I get back to this in another slide later, is make kids believe that they can't handle the many vicissitudes of life. The other thing that boys internalize, unfortunately, expectations that substance abuse as a teenager is like manly and macho. And they also believe they have to have like many boys believe that they have to follow some model of idealized masculinity, which generally kind of leans towards probably what we would call more toxic masculinity. And again, they're seeing this from TV shows, the media, social influencers, video games, some sports stars, some are really great examples of healthy masculinity, some are not. So it's a lot. There's a lot in the mix. And I am treating, and you are parenting a generation of kids who grew up with live shooter drills and constant knowledge and reality of mass shootings. We all live within a very short driving distance of Sandy Hook. This really has affected kids, and we've done many surveys. I don't know if Trumbull was affected, but a couple years ago in October, there were hoaxers calling the different schools with threats, and a lot of my patients were texting me, clients, and saying, "Oh my God, there's a shooter drill." And they were, for some reason, the internet was shut down at the schools, but they could text. And I said, no, I'm online. I'm seeing it's all a hoax. And some of these kids were just terrified. Also, their teachers were crying. And this is something that I mean, I know I grew up. I'm 61 years old. I grew up with during the Cold War. And when they called a drill for, that the Russians might be dropping a bomb on us, we all thought it was a joke. We would go to the basement, of the school, hang out. The teachers weren't particularly scared, but they would have these drills every once in a while. during the Vietnam War, they would have like a war drill. We had to go down in the basement. Children are scared, and they do think of this, and it affects parents too. In fact, that's one of the reasons they think the overparenting may be such a dynamic of we're all living with a false belief that there's more risk than there actually is. But I understand it. I'm a parent. I'm going to skip over the slides. Suffice to say two things. Your kids are using less alcohol and weed than the young adult group. So the young adult group that was in high school during COVID, unfortunately, they're drinking a lot, they're smoking a lot, they're doing high intensity drinking, and 10% of them are using hallucinogens. That really stinks. That's a very high number. Now, you know what we're hoping? Your generation of children had enough, like COVID had some good, and we know this too, we know this. Whenever there's a bad thing that happens, there can sometimes be small silver linings, right? One of them is that the kids are a little bit more innocent. So teenagers that are, say, like 15, 16, 17 now, and they've had delayed exposure to substance use, which we are already seeing as a delayed rate of use. We're hoping it sticks, right? Because generation to generation, there can be real differences in how people think about substances, use substances, etc. Right now, we're looking at a reduction. So that's really great, I think. It's great. But I do want to talk to you about something that you actually have to actively parent around. The weed that you may or may not have smoked in the 90s or not, some of you are young enough to have been in college in the noughts, I think. That was about 3 to 7% THC. And what's available to the average teenager today are these products. I can't call them weed because what they are is a marketing phenomena that came out once cannabis became legal in plant form. All different states. It's now legal, or at least medically, in 38 states. But what they do is they take these, in my opinion, scum of the earth drug dealers, because first it was illegal, then they made it legal, but they would take kilos and kilos of plant weed, put them in industrial mixers, mix gasoline or butane with these products, and pull out gasoline or butane binds with the THC molecule, and they would pull out almost pure THC. And this is what, for the most part, teenagers are smoking now. It's called wax, shatter, butter, crumble, carts. And it's literally, if you just think, just off the top of your head, think, well, what's the difference between 5 or 6% THC and 60 to 90% THC? You almost can't imagine the difference in dose. So this stuff is having a huge effect on teenagers. Let me show you the rates. So this is the latest data that's available. Almost a third of 10th graders are using cannabis. Lifetime use in 8th graders is about 12%. And luckily, these numbers are down. They were higher. We live in an affluent area, and our numbers are a little bit higher than this. And the use of those concentrates, look at this. So back to if 28% of 10th graders are using any cannabis and 25.7% report regular use of dabs, do you see how most of the use are these high potency products? And I really need parents to understand this, because you might want to look the other way, like, oh, it's just weed. I mean, not that weed didn't hurt some people back in the day, but literally this stuff is so potent, and it's having an outsized effect on boys. Boys tend to, when they do get introduced to cannabis, they're a little bit more socialized to smoke more in groups and like out smoke each other, and it's no bueno. And I'll tell you what it's doing, what we're seeing in the youth prevention circles and all over the country in emergency rooms. We're seeing this high potency THC as having rapid addiction potential. It's triggering psychosis and mood disorders in vulnerable teens. In some areas, it's just like off the charts. I have a good friend who's she's a pediatrician, but she's the kind of pediatrician that if her patient is in the emergency room, she's talking, to the doctors of the emergency room. And I saw her in the supermarket, and she's like, oh my gosh, that stuff you were telling me about, like, it's everywhere right now. Just in the last few years, like, I've had 8 of my patients have psychotic breaks. One, she said 2 of them were 14-year-old boys from just smoking that product. That's the only thing. They were smoking the dabs or the carts. And she said one of the boys has come out of it, and sadly, one of the boys has not. We are seeing that here at Insight. We're seeing this at Newport Healthcare. And I'm saying this, I've been in practice actually 35 years. I better update my, it makes me sound too old though, so I'm vain, but until 5 years ago, I never saw an inpatient bed for a teenager that was doing just cannabis. Um, all the time now. We're treating at the Newport Academy and Newport Institute. We are treating residentially kids who are severely addicted to the high potency weed and have had psychotic symptoms from it, or just severe depression. They are not functioning. They're not able to concentrate. It's really sad. Good news on this though is usually the teenagers realize the intense effect the product has had on them, and they get scared off because they also get something, not always, but sometimes called cyclical vomiting, or cannabis induced hyperemesis, which means it's not from smoking the high potency weed, but once the high potency THC levels in their bloodstream are really high, and then they start to go down, the hypothalamus in the brain gets involved and just starts vomiting anything that goes in the system, water, food, whatever. Now, obviously, if this happened to every teen that smoked the high potency weed, it would have a great preventive effect, but it looks like it's about 10% of kids. And I coached a family through this over last weekend. Well, I think it started on Thursday. They brought a young man, their son, to the emergency room. He was cyclical vomiting. The mom knew because she had caught him with the carts. I said, go ahead and tell the doctors that he didn't have it. He didn't have the flu. He didn't have COVID, anything else. And all they do is give you Zofran, which is a nausea medication. And they gave him IVs, but he had to stay in the emergency room for about 20 hours till he was hydrated. And most kids know at least somebody that's had the cyclical vomiting. But the problem is, if you have cyclical vomiting, all you got to do is take one more hit of weed and it goes away, of this high potency weed. So it's pretty concerning. And I have a lecture just on this, that this is so funny to say. I intended it to get through to all the young people and the teenagers, but the only people who seem to really like it online are the researchers and parents. But I think the word is slowly getting out there to young people. And obviously this presentation, I'm trying to get it through to you guys. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about, there's a lot online about the manosphere and the hyper macho influencers. And the reason I bring this up is, boys who identify with very extreme masculine stereotypes have much higher rates of mental health problems. And I'm gonna share a couple slides from now. I'm gonna share that data. And most parents would be horrified to know how much crazy, misogynist, nasty content is out there and is freely shared. And some boys share it amongst each other as like, haha, it's a joke. Some boys just think it's stupid. Adults, like if you and I looked at Andrew Tate's websites, or Nick Fuentes, I don't know if you know, he's the guy who coined Your Body, My Choice, which I happened to be speaking on Long Island the week that video hit. And it happened to be to a group of well, it was a big group, but there was a big group of school social workers there, and they were in a panic over this. And they said, we've had like 50 boys walking around school telling girls, your body, my choice. And it's just, the boys are just parroting these things. They're just repeating them. Like they don't really believe it. I don't even think they know that the real impact of saying something like that. So hopefully your boys are not into this, but they all know about it. And these influencers, may they rot in hell, some of them, like Andrew Tate, yay, he's on house arrest in Romania for being a sex trafficker. And I hope they just, and if he tries to leave the country, he's going to be arrested and put back in prison. I mean, he's really not a good guy. He was making tens of millions of dollars a month selling subscriptions to someone that I know that's a social media researcher, bought a subscription to see, because it was like $12.99 a month. And he would sell it directly, like on YouTube and TikTok. Like, use your parents' credit card, buy these special videos. Boys, I'm going to teach you how to get the girl, in middle school and high school. And it's just all misogynist garbage. And boys were buying them to the tune of like tens of millions of dollars a month. And schools aren't really seeing that much of like a direct reflection of the Andrew Tate like they were, but 2 years ago, since he's been arrested and his online stuff is shut down, it's gotten a little bit better. But this guy had a lot of influence on boys, and the young boys don't really have a perspective. We need to teach it to them because we have critical thinking and we understand, like, oh, this is just entertainment. Like, as much as we might not like the messages, we're not subscribing to it as being like true, but boys, young boys may. In any event, oh, here's a picture of Andrew Tate. That's when he was released from court there. And Joe Rogan, these guys aren't even really that handsome. I don't understand how they make all this money, but whatever. I guess this is the new lesson that Liz can't understand. I always feel like I'm the dinosaur happily chomping on the treetop the day before the asteroid hits. Like, how do these bad people with bad ideas make all this money? I don't understand. But the thing is, the content is purposely made outrageous so that people will share it. And Joe, and again, and I've talked to many of my male patients will say, like, oh yeah, we know it's a joke, but like some of the things are true. And like Joe Rogan, he is a little bit more mainstream, but some of his older videos are like very misogynist and very ridiculous. I think he's probably cleaned up his act recently, but he's the number one downloaded podcast on Spotify. But the stuff he says that's really outrageous is more like clips and stuff that young boys might relate to. So some of them, Andrew Tate, I don't think has a decent message going. Jordan Peterson is another influencer. He has some decent messages, but then some of the stuff is just like women are oppressing men, like, and you got to stand up to women because they're oppressing you. And it's like, okay, well, just, we don't need to get boys thinking that way. We need to think equality. I'm a humanist. I believe like everybody should have equal opportunities and etc. But the healthy examples online, they're just not loud enough. There's so many healthy people saying the right things, and there's so many wonderful examples of like healthy masculinity and men doing amazing things and being caring in a masculine way. And let me tell you this, some people might object to this, but one of the things that I taught my husband and I talked to our sons about, our sons are tall, and they got tall like by sophomore year of high school. And I remember when they started going to parties and stuff, I said, listen, you may find yourself at a party, even if you're not supposed to be there, etc., and you might see a girl really drunk. Like, part of your job as a man is to be protective. If a girl is all alone at a party, really drunk, you've got to go get her girlfriends, and don't do it alone, but like make sure that girl gets home okay, because that girl, and especially before they went to college, I really gave them this message, like, being healthy, a healthy masculine man means also protecting, like, you're always going to be a foot taller than most of the women around you and probably 80 pounds heavier. So like, you have to understand, like, you could intimidate girls, but you can also intimidate guys who might make girls into victims. And I expect you to step up. Now that might sound a little sexist, but isn't it just true? Like, me as a mother, I worried about my girls' physical safety when they went to college a lot. You know what? I didn't worry that much about my boys' physical safety, but I wanted them to know that I expected them to be protective if girls around them were, and probably I'm a little paranoid because of all the awful stories I hear in my practice, but my boys seem to be kind of proud of that teaching, like that we had that talk with them, like, yeah, you are bigger and you are stronger. So right, with this comes responsibility. Like, you have to be a protector of young women around you. You don't objectify them. You don't joke around and take video shots of them if they're drunk at a party. You make sure, but I always said, make sure to get their girlfriends, their friends, and get them, and make sure if they have to go to public health, like this is a college, or back to their rooms. So I think there is a role for true masculinity. My point is, without effeminating like young men, but saying, like, this is your role. You are physically stronger often. You could easily intimidate a woman, but you know what power can come from that? Like, you can really protect, people, all people who are more vulnerable than you. So this is just when we're talking about toxic masculinity, we're talking about the extreme stereotypes. The lonely Marlboro man smoking alone, Clint Eastwood driving off into the distance, leaving his, the woman that he loves, even though he doesn't want to leave her, all those crazy, like, using extreme physical violence or physical force to get your way. So toxic masculinity doesn't mean like being masculine, because I think, dare I say, there's been a lot of overreaction to things, and that's part of kind of the craziness online, etc. Like there is such a thing as masculinity and femininity and different qualities. But what we know is when boys try to live up to toxic masculinity stereotypes, they feel more depressed and especially more anxious and more disconnected because humans have the same emotions. I always would say this, my little baby boy infants cried just as much as my little girl infants. In fact, they were equally demonstrative of affection and very similar until they went to kindergarten and started being more socialized about, even subtly, right? Boys, come on. I can't tell you how many times I was at the side of the team sport and I would hear a coach say, when the boys had done something they weren't supposed to do on the football field or soccer or baseball, come on, ladies, man it up, blah, 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 blah. Even those messages are kind of like, you know, you can't be disappointed. Like I'll never forget one of my son's teams almost won the championship and they lost. And the boys, and they were young, they were like 14, I don't know, between 12 and 14. And the boys were holding back tears. And one of the coaches was cool. He was like, yeah, it stinks. The other was like, come on, girls, man it up. And I'm like, why man it up? They made it to the state championship and they lost. Like, it's okay to be crying in the dugout for a minute, come on. The parents were upset. So I'm saying like we have to give boys the message that it's okay to have all of these feelings, that men can be strong, smart, and kind, right? That men can be physically stronger and have attributes and use their strength for really good reasons. And of course, there's wonderful examples of healthy masculinity all around boys all the time, but they're given these drumbeat messages and these like idealized and quite frankly photoshopped muscular boy things online and workout videos, etc. And they're being told like this is what it is to be masculine, to like have no neck and be lifting weights with your head. And how do we teach them what it means to be a man? They have to be around really good male role models. Like I'm a mom, and the only reason I got involved in like some of this stuff is like saying to the boys, well, I would have the conversation with my husband first. Like, we really want to talk to them about being good protectors. And they got actually I was lucky because my sons are, well, one of them is older than both his sisters. The other is only older than one of his sisters, but they were fiercely protective of their sisters. And I think that's an aspect of healthy masculinity, like being protective, right? Of others and of elders and of not all women, but women who, if a man's trying to take advantage of them. And I have to say, I think things are better than they ever have been with this. I do see so much more affection. Dads just give so much more affection and love and everything. Like my husband, who's 66 and our oldest is 38, when he used to carry our infant daughter in the baby Bjorn is what they used to call it thing, like people would stare at him like, what's up with you? Because he was kind of heterosexual. He was like, yeah, well, whatever, I love carrying the baby, and we'd switch back and forth. Now I just see that all the time. I just love it. So I think our culture's getting better. It's just when you look at the research about what's really dragging on boys' self-esteem, it's feeling often that they don't measure up to this ideal of this stereotypical masculinity, if that makes sense. And there's all kinds of great examples of like healthy masculinity. Like I love it when athletes are like hugging each other, and sometimes it's punching, the boys, it's a little awkward, but like there's so many wonderful examples, and I know you're giving your sons wonderful examples. And here's one of the problems: when boys first start to get anxious or depressed, ironically, even in this younger generation where they're so online, everything is like your mental health matters and this or that. Boys are more likely to help their own friends out who they're worried about with their mental health than to seek help themselves, because they still feel some shame around the stigma of asking for help as a man. And I've been involved in many situations as a young man. I've been involved in many situations where young men get help because their friends who are girls kind of circle the wagons and get them help. Oh, and I did want to share, there's some special risk for young men of color. And unfortunately, this is one of those like scary pieces of data that that's not well explained. I'll tell you the interpretation of it, but young Black men have much higher rates of severe cortisol, of too high cortisol in their system. And we have only been studying this for about, I think, about 15 years, and it's interesting, it's worse for young Black men than Hispanic or Asian men. So it's not all minority men. It's something about the fear of being victims of violence or being seen as more aggressive. And I think this is something we just need to say, like, people do tend to see young Black men as potentially more aggressive. Believe it or not, even Black police officers will perceive a young Black man as potentially more aggressive than the same height and weight young white man. It's a weird phenomenon, but they're not exactly sure why this for young men of color, but young men of color have maybe a little bit more social stigma against asking for mental health help. Very sad variable that usually until about 6 years ago, the death by suicide rate or suicide attempt rate for young Black Americans was very low compared to white Americans, and that gap is closing in, but not because the rates are getting better for white young people, because the rates are getting worse for people of color. But so I'm sorry, I'm so depressing right now, but we're getting into the how to help the young men. So my hope is post-COVID, more and more young men will ask for help. I love it when the young men come here for treatment. They open up. Last week, we run group therapies here. Last week, a young boy opened his whole heart up in group. And I don't think he had, in fact, he said he had never talked that long about his feelings ever. And it was great. All the group members, including the one girl that was in the group that day, just let him go because he just had so much to share about what was worrying him and his girlfriend's emotions, and how his girlfriend's father had abandoned her, and how that made him sad, and how his dad was such a good dad, but his dad had been raised in another country and had all these cultural expectations that were different, and how he didn't mean to get into smoking weed so much, but he thought it was helping his anxiety, and how COVID made him so stressed. And like literally it went on for like 40 minutes. It was like a monologue. And afterwards he had tears coming down. He's like, wow, that felt so good. I don't think I've ever said all those things. And it's not that the boys don't feel those things. It's just teenage girls will get together and have like a group therapy in the bathroom at school. Like, oh my God, this is going on. This is going on. They just are socialized more to share. And boys, we're getting there, but we just need to encourage them that they need to be able to share how they feel, because their feelings are valid. Their feelings are valid. Now, here's how I'm going to teach you how to help these young boys stay safe. Delay your grade. Too late for me. I have a little dye in my hair. First of all, I want to say to you as parents, anybody who's on this lecture at night or anyone who bothers to watch it, follow up, good for you. You already probably are in the low risk group of parents. So good for you. Hey, Mother Nature's given us a gut. Like, if you think something's off with your kid, you're right. And I always give the example as mothers and fathers, when the babies were little and couldn't tell us what was wrong, your gut would tell you, like, oh, I think the baby has a fever. I think they're getting sick. And well, most of the time you'd be right. Most of the time your gut would be telling you, like, I don't know. I don't like the way he looks. Oh, he's not eating as much as he was. Like, I'm talking like a nursing baby, right? Well, the same holds true for teenagers. Now, you're not going to know what's wrong with them necessarily, but listen to your gut. If something feels wrong, it's wrong. And I always say to parents, like, better that you be in a position of coming back later and apologizing for overreacting because you thought something was wrong and nothing was wrong, but go with your gut. You don't need to read every parent book ever written. You don't need to go to every lecture ever done. You have some good and wonderful common sense, and you are the expert on your child. You have watched and observed them for 15 years now, 14 years, whatever. Some of the things that I shared with you in the beginning, you're going to slowly see them develop, like the limbic system taking over the brain, right? Or other things. But sometimes you're just going to have a gut like, I'm not really sure I like how things are going with my son and his new friend. I kind of have a feeling something's rotten in Denmark. I'm not saying you should accuse them, but just listen to that gut, right? One thing that can really help, and I'm going to give you permission again as a older mom with grown kids, don't let the peer pressure of other parents get to you. If you think something that your son's group of friends is all being allowed to do, your son is not ready for it. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that happened, I live in Reading and my kids went to Barlow, which is a great high school, similar to, Trumbull High School, great school. And in one of my son's peer groups, there were families that were quite affluent and had summer homes and started to let the boys go there on weekends unsupervised and hang out. Like, because they were in like Rhode Island or Jersey Shore or whatever. And I was like, what, like, to me, that just sounds like the most psychotic decision ever. Like, oh, yeah, a bunch of 16-year-old boys loading into cars, with a fake ID, or someone's brother buys them alcohol, driving on the Jersey Turnpike to the Jersey Shore on a Friday and staying till Sunday alone. What could go wrong, right? And we were often the family saying no. And oh boy, that was a fight a couple times in our house. Like, you just have to go with your gut. And by the way, later on, we found out, and our sons even told us, like, crazy, not safe things that happened in those trips. So sometimes you're going to hear something that's kind of being allowed in the peer pressure of parents that you're just like, nope, doesn't work for my family. Like, and I never got into lecturing anybody else. I didn't want to butt into your problems, but I would say to my kids, my son's like, no, that's just not going to fly in our family. That doesn't fit our family rules. And my one son was very sassy. He'd be like, oh, that's right, you're the expert. Like, your rules are better than other people's. I go, well, they're the rules that Daddy and I have spent a long time crafting, and you always knew what the rule is. And the rule is, no, at 16, you can't sleep over somebody's house unsupervised, whether it's down the road in Reading or Easton or on the Jersey Shore or in Vermont. Now, if parents are going up and you guys are all going skiing and we're supervising you, that's different. But you weren't invited, Liz. Like, okay, like, and it's hard. Honestly, there were quite a few situations where parents would do and say things, I think, to try to motivate their sons. I don't know what, that just sounded like the dumbest idea. And we had to say no. And we got told, how mean and rotten and awful we were. Stick with your gut, back to the gut. It's never going to be wrong. One thing I do want to say that can really make parenting your teen boy a lot easier is try to really let them pick their own interests. I know you've probably heard this, but parents, they want to curate that college resume, right? And they want to push their kids towards certain things. Well, the whole point of being involved in sports and hobbies as a teenager is to develop grit, to keep going and learn everything that you can about different subjects and different topics and stuff like that, and to push yourself in a sport. And teenagers who know that their parents are going to support their own interests. Like my son, who's now a scientist, he was a skateboarder, and he was actually a really good skateboarder. And it wasn't a team sport and whatever, but he won competitions. He helped run like a day skateboarding day camp over the summer, and he loved it. And he would do it for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And, it was a little bit sad. He started out doing baseball, and now he says he wished we pushed him more to stay in baseball, but he didn't really want to stay in baseball at the time. And, obviously you don't want your kids to quit something if they're just in a bad mood. And what we did in the Jorgensen house always was like, if you sign up for this season with this team, or it's, a travel team or something like that, like, you better be absolutely sure you want to do this, because we're going to make you ride out the commitment, right? Like, unless you have an injury. But I find a lot of parents get into unnecessary conflicts with their sons because they're trying to steer them towards maybe the sports or activities that they enjoyed, or maybe the ones that they think are more important for the college resume. And then you just want to spend time with your kid. And I know it's hard when they're being kind of rude and ignoring you, etc. I mean, a good thing is always invite their friends along and take them all out, like to a diner somewhere to eat. I used to love driving my sons and their friends in the car for that magical time before anybody started driving, and like hearing them all tuck shit in the back, and they kind of forget you. They don't even remember that you're in the car. Sometimes you'll hear some pretty like confidential stuff come up, which is kind of funny. But I just always love to be with them and learn about them and hear about their lives. And then I would make excuses to spend special time, with our kids. And whenever I could, I wish I had had more time. They grow up and leave so fast. And the truth is, with teenagers, you just want to be around. And I joke around, teenagers would probably love nothing more than you be frozen in animation, like in the kitchen preparing their favorite food, right? Or getting their favorite takeout out of a bag with a big pocket full of money that's just, coming out like an ATM, and they don't want you to talk to them until the one day out of 7 that they're really upset and the teacher treated them badly and coach is being a jerk and blah 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 blah, and they didn't get any playtime in practice today and blah 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 blah. It's kind of part of that teenage brain development that they really kind of ignore us a lot of the times. But try not to take it personally and just realize you want to be around enough that you're there when they do need you, when they have had that crummy day, when their best friend has just started dating their secret crush, when they're like, oh, I should have told my son one time, like, I should have told my best friend that I had a crush on her because he wouldn't have gone for her, like whatever. I go, oh, honey, that stinks. You want to be around with them and keep trying new suggestions. If your son's like, I don't want to hang out with you, just keep trying new things. And make sure that your son has other caring adults in his life, other men, extended family, coaches, friends of the family. We can't always be the only role model, and it's not good. And like sometimes you're just gonna lose temper with your kid too, and you're gonna want somebody else to guide and direct them. So that's the basic. And then, I want to just tell you something. Again, controversial, but only because it's true. Boys tend to express a lot more physical aggression and competition in adolescence. They just do. And there's some debate as to how much is culture, how much of it is innate. Boys will turn almost anything into a competition if you let them. And we say some physical fighting among boys is within normal limits. I mean, not that you want them to do it, but I'll never forget my son and his best friend. And my son's best friend was over our house a lot his 8th grade year because his mom had just passed away from cancer. They were actually our neighbors too. It was so sad. And it was somewhere between 8th and 9th grade. And I hear them laughing, joking around, doing whatever they were doing. And then all of a sudden I hear, and I know they're physically fighting. By the time I get down to the family room, my son's friend was on top of my son. And my son was a good 8 inches taller than him. He could have flipped Robert over. And I kind of saw that he was restraining. And I said, boys, all right, that's enough. And then Robert looked at me and said, Mrs. J, he started it, like he tripped me, and he started laughing. And I go, guys, break it up. And then like 2 minutes later, they're playing video games again, laughing. Like you don't need to ground them. You don't need to freak out because it's kind of within normal limits. And then guess what? 2 days later, they had another physical fight outside. And then that it ended with laughing. And any of you have raised boys and are like, oh, 1 minute they could be having a physical fight and it's bad and somebody has a bloody lip. Next thing they're laughing. And I can't tell you how many times my husband and I said to our sons, no playing hockey in the house. And they would start at it again. And they would start in the garage. I'd say, fine, you could play hockey in the garage, but the cars are out. It's cold. I'll move the cars out, go around, so they would play street hockey. And the next thing you know, I come downstairs and there's puck holes in the wall of the family room. I'm like, oh my God. So this is like typical boy nonsense. And do you know, I can't even tell you, there was probably at least 50 holes in the wall that our sons had to patch from either just, and this is over like 15 years, okay, of like throwing balls in the house or playing hockey in the house was a big one. My sons were hockey players, and like, because boys just have like this pent up energy sometimes. Like I'm laughing at it now. And when I say it was normal, we said, cut it out. You have to fix the holes. Like we didn't say like, oh, boys will be boys. But meaning don't get yourself all worried if your boys are showing some intense competition with their friends, with their siblings, brothers. Brothers will always do this. They'll like defend, they'll show competition between them, but then they'll defend if somebody else wants to like be aggressive to their brother, like no way, Jose. And again, that's pretty normative. It's within normal limits, is what we say. And teen boys, so sometimes boys get their competition really out with video games, and you'll hear them like screaming and yelling, and like you think it's literally they're in the battle for their lives, and they're just on whatever game with their friends, remote. And they really do seem to have a need to, hey, we're primates, they're kind of rank ordering each other. They're kind of strutting their stuff, and And that's all good. And I would just say, I would look the other way a lot of times, especially if my sons were yelling on a video game and cursing a little bit. I'd be like, ugh, whatever. I would just want to put earplugs in or put my sound canceling headphones on. But again, I mean, you have to be comfortable with it in your house. But the truth is, if you kind of look the other way for some of them getting their physical aggression out, then they're going to be a lot better behaved in other ways. And teens especially need group affiliation, but we have a lot of research showing that boys especially do well when they're on a sports team or, scouts or something where there's some rules and group affiliation and expectations, and girls do this as well. Obviously sports are really good for girls too, but so I'm not saying that, but girls are actually better at forming and norming their own social groups. Boys do a little bit better with like set groups, like even if it's chess club or meeting the same group online to play a video game on the weekends or whatever. And they kind of need that. They need that socializing sometimes. And I always said my boys did much better academically when they were on a team sport. You think that they would have more time the seasons that they were not on a team sport, but it was, well, first of all, coaches would be like, you got to keep your grades up, whatever. There seems to be something pretty dynamic. And if your boy's not into team sports, there's lots of other ways to get them like group affiliated. A little bit hard because a lot of them just want to be group affiliated on video games online. And so as parents, if you can kind of set limits kindly on these behaviors, like I never screamed at my kids for doing this stuff, but I'd be like, all right, I guess Saturday morning is going to be fill in 5 more puck holes in the wall because you boys won't stop. Like, I don't understand it. It's your free time you're giving up. So we want to avoid shaming boys for this behavior, is what I'm saying. See, like as fathers, as partners, as if you're the mom watching and you want to tell your partner, the simple act of fathers and grandfathers, uncles, male role models, comforting a child's distress, showing respect is protective of the teen's mental health. Like dad staying involved, right? And trying to give affection, even if the son's pushing away, like it's really pretty powerful because we want to dissolve shame for teen boys like that. No, men feel affection for each other, and your dad loves you, and sometimes he's going to grab you and like hug you, and it's really a good thing. And I think that's where uncles and grandfathers and coaches and stuff can step into, because teenagers, they do need to separate from us and separate in terms of the intense love they feel for us as parents, but they need role models around them. And like, here's the thing, I always say, like, your teenager's probably going to push the affection away. Keep going in for it every once in a while because they do appreciate it. They do love it. Even a secret handshake or something that makes the boy feel cared for and cherished. And I do want to talk a little bit now. I'm going to get about like dealing particularly with like real problematic behaviors. So I kind of talked about the normal problematic behaviors. So if your son has frequent irritability that lasts and lasts and is getting worse, one of the things you want to be aware of is irritability is really the hallmark symptom of anxiety and depression in young men. So all people can be irritable sometimes, but girls do tend to be a little bit better at being like, I feel anxious, I'm sad, I'm depressed. Boys will tend to, we call it externalizing behavior. Like they'll be irritable, they'll break something, they'll storm around their room. Every once in a while could be again totally normative behavior, but if it's a pattern and you notice it's happening a lot and it's your child is almost always irritable, like there really might be something going on. And then not occasional avoidance of responsibilities and tasks, but if there's a pattern of real avoidance of life tasks and repeated strong defensiveness if you just ask questions. Because listen, parents have to nag. Teenagers would get nothing done if parents didn't nag. In fact, there's study after study shows that the more your parents nag you, the more successful you'll most likely be. But there's a difference between like, so some kids will leave work till the last minute, but they get it done. But say your son is constantly avoiding like tasks and leaving them for the last minute and then getting extremely overwhelmed and then defensive and not able to get those things done. Like, yeah, that could be a pattern. That could mean that there's some kind of risk, even in terms of them just being overwhelmed with maybe they're in too many AP classes and they really should step down to honors or to college prep. But like if there's a pattern where instead of an occasional avoidance, that's the pattern. And many boys, when they're depressed again and anxious, will just avoid things to avoid further injury to their ego, if that makes sense. So they're already feeling bad about themselves, and then they can't complete a certain task or certain activity, and rather than asking for help, they pull back and avoid. And we do see this sadly as sometimes a pattern in adult men as well, because again, adult men in our culture are not taught that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to say like, hey, I'm completely overwhelmed with this work project and I need somebody to help me. We really do kind of have the myth of the Lone Ranger in our society for men, right? Where it's just actually it's a fallacy. Nobody accomplishes great things alone. It just doesn't happen. Scientists don't, and engineers don't, and teachers don't, and entrepreneurs don't. They pretend that they do, but they have usually, if they're really successful, they have hundreds of thousands of people behind them. But boys will feel like they have to do it alone and not ask for help. And like, listen, if you find drug paraphernalia, if you find stuff hidden in their rooms, alcohol bottles, etc., you got to respond to it. They're never holding it for their friend, and you can respond. You're going to see in my next couple slides I get into, like, you can respond in a way that's firm and calm, but like you've got to respond to it. You can't just look the other way. And that's where I say we don't say boys will be boys. Like, we've got to step in. And again, you're not going to like run to put your kid in a rehab, but like teenagers need and want limits. And this world that we're raising them in is pretty overwhelming to them and pretty stressful. And they need us to step in and be like, no, 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 no more of this, no more of this, no more of this, no more of this. And we're going to hold you accountable. And the boy that I told you before that's in group therapy spilling his guts, well, the way he wound up here was he got caught smoking weed. And his parents had caught him before, and he gave a song and a dance about how I only smoke twice, but you just caught me both times. And they did. At first, Dad felt guilty, but he looked through his room and he literally found like a box full of stuff. And at first, the son came in here like, he was Mr. Badass and didn't want any help. And then basically said, yeah, I've been smoking way too much weed. And then we were teaching him how the high potency weed affects the brain. And he was like, oh my God, yes. He goes, I'm not even getting high anymore. I'm just smoking it to not feel sick. And like, we've really helped him a lot, but his parents had to have their foot down and say like, no more of this. Like, we found all these pipes, we found this, we found that, we found these carts. And I don't know, I think the parents maybe had seen me do a similar presentation. So the parents are from another country and were especially like terrified. I mean, they're citizens, but they were like terrified, like, oh my God. And the kid's doing great now because the parents put their foot down. They said, you're not going to drive the car because you've been doing this stuff. And, they had a rough weekend with them when they first put their foot down, but now less than 2 weeks later, boy, this kid is turning it around. So as hard as it is to set those limits, it's absolutely necessary. And even if you don't find drug paraphernalia or anything like that, if your kid has frequent angry outbursts, breaking things, storming around, the dad that I told you I was texting with before we started, the reason he's upset is months ago, before the son started counseling, he would get so upset and he would like break things in his room, whatever. Well, he doesn't. Oh, excuse me. He doesn't do that anymore. But Dad was worried that he was gonna again. But that's why they got him help, because the son would like break his own phone or break things, and was really experiencing some very, very serious depression that was being expressed as irritability. And so sometimes the intense angry outbursts really, they could look like a behavior problem and they could look like your son's just acting out, but really and truly they may have serious underlying depression and or anxiety. And some kids are homebodies and just like to be home. So I'm not saying like your child's temperament, and your kid may be happy at home, only occasionally getting together physically with friends. And this changed a lot during COVID too. Kids started getting into multiplayer, games and really meeting at a certain time and having community online. But if your kid is like always alone, not interacting with peers, and if they spend almost all their non-school time alone, that's concerning. And it young boys don't have to have lots of friends. In fact, we know it's healthier for all teenagers to have maybe one or two very close friends, and then some activity friends, like the kids they play baseball with, or the kids that they play video games with, or etc. But if your kid is like, what a lonely kid looks like that, and maybe they had friends before, and you're seeing a real change because they've drastically pulled back and they're not interacting with their friends anymore. Like that definitely is a risk factor. And listen, they're going to avoid you sometimes, but if they're never interacting with you and there's a drastic change, you got to get that kid seen by somebody. And if they are preoccupied or mentioning death or suicide, you got to get on that right away. In fact, it's so unusual for boys to talk about those things. Girls, it it often is a high risk factor for a girl too, but girls can be a little bit more dramatic with their sharing of things and whatnot. Boys, when they say those things, you got to get them help right away. That's generally a real high risk. So here's the best way to talk to your teen male's brain. And here's where I gave you the depressing slide. Now I'm going to try to make the funny slide. Remember back to my slide of the limbic system? You never want to go limbic on limbic with a teenager because they're like the Energizer Bunny. They'll just keep going and they'll keep making their point and they'll keep demanding their position and they'll keep begging for whatever they want. Or they'll keep telling you how you're stupid and you don't know what you're doing, whatever. When you have to make a firm rule with your son, you want to say it calmly and firmly, and you do not want to go limbic on limbic. And I know it's so hard, but you got to give them time out by giving yourself time out. In fact, when I used to do this speech more live, I would show what I would do when I would start to like, my kid was coming at me and I'd be like, nope, sorry, you're grounded. Remember, you lost the car because of whatever. And they'd come at me. I would just physically get out of there and actually lock myself in my own bathroom and just take time out myself. Because, if a kid's already 6 feet tall, you can't pick them up and put them in the playpen anymore, right? So, but you've got to get out of there because you're only human. Of course, you're going to lose your temper. Of course, you're going to start thinking how ungrateful, ridiculous this kid. If this kid had any idea how much better they have it than I had it, like the rules when I grew up, and that's the wrong tack to take with the teen. You just stay firm and calm. Pretend you're talking to a developed brain and say, sorry, we made the rule, you broke the rule, this is the consequence, and then you get out of there. And then this is what I'm going to go over with you guys, some validating language. So there's a lot of talk these days about validating our kids' feelings, and the overparenting crew can sometimes do this to the point where it's like a Saturday Night Live skit, like, oh, honey, I understand you're so, enraged, you're murderously enraged. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. But validating, like, particularly if I had to say no to our kids for something, if we had to say no to going to the Vermont house alone when other friends were going, or like this one, I've known kids who in anger throw their phone and break it. And hey, I know you must be really upset to have thrown your phone down like that, but I'm here for you when you want to talk, and then you walk away, right? Or the kid that's being really avoidant and you want to avoid an extreme fight. Hey, it's been a week since I asked you to do your laundry, clean your room, show us that you finished your project, and it seems that you're just not able to get this done. I'm not mad, but I'm a little bit worried, and we got to figure out a plan. Like, we got to get this done. Now, if they start yelling at you, say like, okay, not appropriate, walk away. But and that's where texting can be great. Like, hey, when you're ready to talk about this, like, we need to get a plan together to help you catch up on all your missing English work or whatever it is. And you might have to say that a few times, but the point of all this is you want to be as firm in yourself about what the rule and the expectation is, and you want to say it as calmly as possible. And those two techniques put you in the alpha position, right? Because again, we're primates. So, the teenage boy wants to be the alpha chimp, obviously, and they want to roll the roost, and they want to drive the car when they want to drive the car and all that. And as soon as we start yelling back at them, we lower our position and we lower their respect for us. If we can stay firm and calm, which doesn't mean like, oh my God, honey, is this okay? That's not what I'm talking about at all. But like, hey, we had a deal. You knew that you had to get that English paper done before you were going to be allowed to go, to whatever event. And I'm not mad, but we need a plan. You got to get that English work done. Like you're going to fail English and that's not okay. And then you walk away because they already know that they haven't done it. If you're firm and calm and then say, hey, I'm here to help. We're worried and we're here to help. And then wait and see. They often will come back in the weirdest way. Like I remember one time I was having an argument like that with my son, and he's like, "I don't need any help. I don't need any help. I don't need." I said, "Okay, fine. I'm here if you need me." And then like an hour and a half later, he just like walks in my room, sits down next to me where I was getting some work done, and he's like, "Well, I mean, if you could explain like the scientific method for this thing," like, and he was kind of being rude to me. But I was like, okay, I'll explain my understanding of the project to you. I think he was a freshman in high school. So like the other thing is I think parents get hung up on like what the kid says to us versus what they do. Now we didn't allow like expletives, like you couldn't say the F word in my house and you couldn't be cruel. But if you were rolling your eyes and like, this is stupid, this is dumb, you don't know what you're talking about, whatever, I'd be like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. I would just think limbic, 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 ka, poo, poo, poo. And I would walk away as long as they came back and they got it done. That's all I cared about. And I think that'll take care of like 80% of your conflicts with your son. If you focus, I always say you want to keep your eyes on the prize, like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, like they're gonna have their little temper tantrums, they're gonna have their little I'm the alpha chimp moments. But if we could stay calm and firm and keep coming back to the fact that we are the parent, we do have a right to have expectations of them, we do have a right for them to know that they have certain accountabilities to us that they just have to do. Like it's not a choice. Like they got to do certain things. And back to the reason I brought that up right in my overparenting slide is the opposite of what kids need to be well is overparenting, where you like I've had parents come in here and confess to me that they were doing their kids' work for them. Like if the kid refused to do the English paper and it was due, the mother would write a draft or the father would like start to fill out the worksheets for them. And like so sometimes it's like crazy toxic like that. Sometimes it's just like, okay, I know you weren't really sick this morning, you were just tired, but I'm only going to call you in one more time, whatever. Like no, 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 no. We need to let our children as teenagers have the natural consequences of their own behavior. It's so important. And I know all good parents know that they want their child to have the benefit of the natural consequences. What overparenting does is when parents swoop in and right at the last minute take the consequences away and say like, okay, if you do that again next time, you're going to really have the consequence, because they don't learn hypothetically that way, right? And a lot of times the overparenting is about our anxiety or our need for some maybe status as parents, instead of like my eyes on the prize were always about I want my kids to be fine without me. God forbid if I die young and they're still relatively young, I want them to know and have the confidence that they have grit and they can pursue things and they can face difficult consequences and they can be okay. And I promised you some funny stories, but I want to tell you kind of a story that encapsulates what's wrong with overparenting. And there's many different ways to do it. And quite frankly, you younger parents, I feel bad for you because overparenting has been held up as the ideal. You're meant to feel like a slacker if you aren't checking Power School like 10 times a day and making sure you're not, if you're not totally aware of every nuance of what's happening in your kid's life. That's just not healthy for teenagers. Like teenagers should have some private things, not shameful things and not secrets, but things that are private, right? Things that are just out of your domain, like that you just don't know about. Oh, can you see my screen still, Bill? You can. Okay. Something went on my end. And I know we're recording, so I don't want to. Let me see if I can find my screen again. Wait, so you can see my screen, Bill? You can. Okay. Goodness no. See, where's a teenager when you need one? How come I can't see my screen? I do not know. Okay. For some reason. Okay, now I see it again. Whoop! I hit one button and it went black on my end. Okay, that's my nightmare. So I'm going to tell you the story of Zorba the Greek and the cocoon, and you guys probably don't know who Zorba the Greek was. He was like a kind of a public character, myth, and a real man. Probably, I think he lived during like the early 1920s, and in any event, there was a famous movie with Zero Mostel called Zorba the Greek. But one of the stories from his journals were when he was 12 years old, he had the free reign of his parents' vineyards. In Greece, and the rule was he had to be home by sunset. And one day when he was out running around having this idyllic boy's life, getting dirty, looking at nature and animals, he saw a cocoon that was pulsating on one of the trees, and it looked like the butterfly was just about to come out of the encasement. And Zorba watched and watched and watched the cocoon and was hoping that he would see this miraculous moment of life, right? Of the butterfly coming out. And soon it was almost fully dark, and he knew he would miss it, and it might happen in the middle of the night. So it wasn't totally fully dark yet, though, because he could still see. So he took his pocket knife out and he cut the cocoon, and the monarch butterfly beautifully fell up. It flew up for just a minute, but then the wings were too weak and it fell down to the ground, and it was dead fairly soon, because that butterfly needed at least another day or so of pushing its wings against the cocoon to build the muscles in order to live. So in a way, when we take those consequences away from our child, we're cutting the cocoon, that struggle that they need in order to be okay for their whole lives without us. And I know that's a powerful story, but I think it really kind of fits the overparenting dilemma, not dilemma, but the problem with overparenting. Okay, now Bill, since you don't even know what I did, how come my slide isn't going forward? You don't even know what I did though. I can't advance my slide for some reason. I don't suppose you know how to do it over there, do you?
No, it's on the story of Zorba the Greek and Cocoon slide, but if you want,
Right, I can't move it forward on my end here. I'm trying to figure out what's blocked.
yeah, you may need to end the screen share and try again.
Okay, sorry folks. Actually, great. We can just do a quick review of everything we've learned today. Okay. Yeah, we're right back. There you go. I love when technology works the right way. Okay, here we go. So what's my definition of enabling? And I don't want to be, listen, I didn't want to see my kids go through some of the terrible things they went through. Their first broken heart. I'm still friends with the high school principal my kids had because I was in his office with one of my sons being disciplined 3 times by the principal and one twice. Okay. So, but he was such a great principal. We became fast friends because he loved the fact that I made my kids fess up when they did something wrong. That's actually why we wound up there more than the average family. So anytime I do something for someone else that they could or should do for themselves, I'm cutting that cocoon. I'm taking away the necessary struggle that that child will need to be a good adult and to be a kind adult and to have that healthy masculinity, if he's a boy or a man, to stand up, to help others, to be a good role model. And sometimes parents, they kind of just want to take the edge off, so they take away natural consequence, and like calling a kid in sick when they really just are skipping or something like that. Don't do it. And I'm going to tell you a famous story. Believe it or not, one of the Jorgensen children was actually arrested the week after high school graduation for he tried to pin it that he would have nothing himself to do with the weed, but his best friend was in the front seat of his car, lit a joint in front of the one 4-way stop sign in Easton, Connecticut, where the police department is literally next to the stop sign. You can't make this up. It's so crazy. Any people who drive through Easton, there's like a 4-way intersection where the library and the police department are one. My son was driving his car and his best friend lit up a joint. And they got pulled over, and it was a felony then. My son's 36 and he got arrested. Oh yeah. And I got a call, it was about 10:30 at night, from my son's DARE officer who had taught him in the 5th grade, whatever, DARE. And he says, Liz, I don't know what to tell you, but I got Marty and Chris here. Oh my God, are they okay? Did they have a car accident? Oh my God, Anthony, what's up? He goes, no, they're okay, but they've been arrested for possession of marijuana. Now, Chris was not intoxicated, but he was driving. And I'm like, what? I was like having an out of body experience. What? 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 I was like, I couldn't even. And of course, my husband never goes away on trips. He was on a wilderness camping trip in Canada at the time, unreachable. Because I'm like, if I ever needed a dad intervention moment, it was then. And I said to I was really in shock. And I said, Officer Anthony, like, this is okay. I don't know what to say, but I always told my kids, if you get arrested, if you're getting in an accident or something like that, I'll come right and I'll be there and whatever. You get arrested for something stupid, you're staying in the jail overnight. I'll come get you in the morning. Cause I hate to say I'm a little old school like that. And he said, Liz, the problem is in Easton, we don't have a jail cell. We bring them to Bridgeport. And I'm the only officer on tonight because in Easton only has 6,000 residents. And so I'd have to drive him over to Bridgeport. Now I'm thinking of all the lectures I've ever given about like, let him have the natural consequences. And I'm freaking out. Right. And I said, Anthony, I also had a 8-year-old in bed asleep and my husband was traveling. I said, I don't know what to do. He said, Liz, because I know your family and Chris is a good kid. He said, he's over here crying. Actually, he knew that you'd be apoplectic. And he goes, I'll drive him around in the cruiser all night, but please be here before change of shift in the morning. Cause I don't think the captain would like the fact that he's still here. I'd be like, okay. So he drove around all night with it. And I'm sure they had some talks. And when I picked my son up in the morning, he had gone from, because my son actually, you want to hear something funny? He's actually a geothermal geologist. He's a smart cookie. But oh my God, was he cocky and such a jerk at that age, such a alpha chimp boy. And this arrest was the best thing that ever happened to him. It humbled him right down. And we decided we were kind of on the edge about whether he was mature enough to go to college at 18, because a lot of boys are not quite ready. In fact, a third of all freshman boys fail out or are asked to leave college. So that says to me the same as kindergarten, like maybe they're a little too old. So that helped us know that he had to do classes locally. But of course it was in the paper because it was a felony. Next time I saw some of the ladies at a meeting or whatever, like, oh, the carpenters or the shoemakers' kids have no shoes. Like, your kid got arrested. I'm like, yep. Meanwhile, I'm thinking like, could happen to anyone. But I have to say, making my son, he had to pay his own court fees, everything. It changed his life. He grew up 5 years in those few months, and he is the best man. He would come. My dad died of a very long, painful neurological disorder, kind of similar to Lou Gehrig's disease, but it was slower. It was awful. Every Sunday, as a grown man, as a working geologist, my son would show up with my dad's favorite chicken wings, watch all the games with him, cut meat off the bone and give it to him when my dad got too weak to eat it. And my dad would see him come and he'd be like, oh, thank God, some testosterone in this house. All these women are driving me crazy. And my dad was a good example of healthy masculinity. My son is a wonderful man. But this event humbled him. And the fact that I basically said, you broke my heart. I cannot believe you did this. This is so dumb. Didn't scream, didn't yell. That's a very personal story for me to share with you, but I got to tell you something. This is how I need you to think of this. You don't want to take a consequence away because it can literally be the thing that turns the trajectory of your child's life. And my kid was not like a big pothead or anything. I think they were like, yo, we just graduated. We're so cool. Okay. Research shows that teens' brains develop faster when parents are firm and calm and have reasonable limits. And I won't go into the whole study because I want to leave time now for questions and answers and stuff. But basically, when the kid knows what the limits are, like my son told the police officer, oh no, my mom told me if I ever get arrested for something stupid like this, she's not picking me up. Like he knew I was serious, because the rule is only a rule if the kid knows you're going to be serious and you're going to uphold it, which is another problem with the overparenting. Like we have hypothetical rules that we don't enforce. Like, no, you want to support it and you want to give them lots of love and love too. Like I remember the day after my son was arrested, I said, get over here. I gave him a big hug and I said, Chris, I love you more than anything on this earth. And he's my son that's 6'3". And I said, and I couldn't bear if something happened to you. I said, the reason I couldn't talk to you for a day was I, I was terrified you were on the wrong track. I like the humility you're showing me with this, but we have a path that we have to walk down together. And he started to cry, and it really was a turning point in his life. And I honestly, I almost feel like if I had like, the Grinch stole Christmas when his heart grows. I think my son's brain grew like 3 times in size after that incident. But whatever it is that you're dealing with your son, the firmness, the calmness, the rules, the consistency, that brain develops faster. They start to make better decisions. And this is from John Knight, who's retired now. He's a developmental pediatrician, but he goes, to parents of affluence, remember the 7 C's of influencing teen behavior: car, cell phone, curfew, cash, credit card, computer, console. You giveth these privileges to your child, and you may taketh them away. And we all lived without many of these things. The kids, even boys, will have these dramatic, like, out of body experiences if, God forbid, you take the cell phone away or the car. But when the crime has been sufficient enough, or when the bottom line is that they're not doing their schoolwork and they're gaming too much, etc., you got to take the console away. I used to work at Danbury Hospital before I opened my practice, and I used to it was easier then because you could just take the game controllers. It wasn't all on the computer and stuff, and I would just take them in my car to the hospital, like, so they couldn't play. Like, you got to do this stuff, like, and you're allowed to, parents, and you're allowed to say no to credit cards and to buying things and all that stuff, and you're allowed to say no to the car, and your kid will respect you more, quite frankly, if you do take some of this stuff away. They only become, have a brat attack if they think it's gonna work. So, and teenagers have confessed to me over the years, oh yeah, sometimes I get my dad so riled up. Like, boy, I'll never forget, he was adopted, and loving family, wonderful family. And anytime he really wanted his way with his dad, he would be like, you don't understand how hard my life is, that I've been adopted, whatever. And then the dad would give in, and, like, even though he had just caught him smoking weed, he'd be like, all right, you can have your cell phone back, whatever. And I really had to say to the dad, like, who are you making feel better? Or who are you making better with this, him or you? You're making yourself feel better. And that teenager actually confessed, Dad, I just say that thing about my adoption because I know you'll always give in to me. And the kid actually felt bad, right? Like, don't let them say stupid things. You want to stay calm and firm. That's my mantra. Try not to take the bait when they say those disrespectful things. And as I said this before already, but some of my things I like to repeat because they're so important. Just focus on their compliance to the rule that you've actually set, or the task or activity that you're actually trying to reinforce. Stand your ground if the limit is well established and your son's going limbic on you. And these are things my actual kids said to me. You ruin my life if I can't go to this concert. You're a psycho. One time my son picked up the phone. He could have been talking on his cell phone anywhere in our house, right? He's right in the kitchen where I'm cooking, and he goes, I'm not even going to ask my mother if I can do that because my mother's a psycho. My mom's such a psycho. Like, but he kept calling me psycho. And I was like, I didn't get offended. I was like, yeah, I'm psycho, mommy. That's actually right. So don't even ask me about that unsupervised, whatever it is, because I'm a psycho. So try not to get all riled up by their words. Instead, focus on their compliance. And they can only stay limbic for so long. They get really tired and they just start watching videos or something and calm down. Basically every family should have a family safety contract of what are your safe rules? And one thing, and so that, and the rules have to be logical and allow teens some freedom and some accountability. Parents have to be accountable too. You can't be sitting there getting drunk at night and then leave to go pick them up because they're left somewhere, right? And they need a ride. And you want to set as many rules as possible in advance. I mean, sometimes the teenagers will shock you and do something that you didn't think they would do, so you have to come up with a rule on the fly. Like, my rule was just no weed. I didn't think I had to say no weed in the car that we gave you to drive, but but for most rules, you can come up with both the rule and the consequences for the breach of the rule in advance. And these are a couple of the books that I've read and I think are pretty decent. Maggie Dent is actually a parent expert from Australia, but they have a similar culture to ours, not quite as indulgent. But she talks a lot about the things that we're talking about. Michael Guran, he's a psychologist who talks a lot about how boys are, different than girls and kind of how they need sometimes more autonomy. Um, and whenever you can give your son autonomy in a decision, do that. I mean, all teenagers want autonomy, but that kind of goes to the healthy masculinity. So like if your son goes like, you can't control me, you can't make me do my work, an autonomous response would be something like, well, you're right, we can't force you to get your English work done, but there'll be consequences if you fail, and then you walk away. You're right, Christopher, we can't stop you from smoking weed, but if you choose to use, you can't use the car for now. That's an autonomous decision. So you say like, yeah, you're right, I can't stop you from doing these things. Once you're out, I can't stop you from being late for curfew, but if you are late for curfew, you know the rule. You're going to lose an hour off tomorrow's night, or you're going to be grounded tomorrow night. And those are the ways that you want to do that. Ultimatums don't work. So you want to offer choices. This was a real thing that happened to us. Kids' parents would constantly go, they had a pied-à-terre in Manhattan, and they would go for the weekend and leave the boys alone at their house. And I'd say, no, you can't stay over Jason's house when his parents are away, but you can stay there till 11:30 and I'll come pick you up. I'd rather die, my son said. I said, this is before they were driving. I said, okay, well, that seems rather dramatic, but whatever. And then guess what? The same son came, handed me my pocketbook and said, let's go. I go, where are we going? Jason's house. Okay. Whatever. And then I picked him up at 11:30. Our first family safety rule is safety. Our first family rule is safety. So you can't take the car out tonight because it's getting icy. I hear you tell me that your friends are already out driving and it must be really frustrating. So that's a way to be like, you're not getting enough power struggle. Like, yeah, it's really frustrating that your friends' parents, and sometimes it's true, sometimes they're exaggerating, but whatever. And then, so validating and avoiding power struggles also sounds like this. We hear you that everyone's using weed, but we have addiction risk in our family. So our safety rule on this is that we don't want you using while your brain is developing. When you're an adult, you're right. You can make your own decisions on this, but we're going to try to keep you as safe as possible. Doesn't mean they're always going to listen, but do you see how it's not an ultimatum? You're not like, you're going to be grounded for life, or God help you if you do this. That just doesn't work. It's not effective or efficient. So we try to avoid it. So a few words on gaming. Yeah, boys can get really girls tend to get much more addicted to social media overuse. Boys, it's more the gaming. Been there, done that, parents. I told you I used to hide their gaming equipment. I had all kinds of tricks. And it's much harder now because everything's, Wi-Fi, etc. But you definitely have to lock down that gaming if your son is neglecting his schoolwork, and they need to earn it. And you know what I used to do? I used to have, they could earn it on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, but only after I checked Power School and they were in good standing. If they weren't, they had to make up work that they had missed, and then they could get their gaming time after that. But then, we can't monitor it all because eventually they can go to college and just sit around and game. But you definitely have a right to set limits on how long they're on the gaming. And one thing I have to say is, please do not allow any sports gambling. 6% of American college-age men right now are actively addicted to sports gambling. This was one of the stupidest things that the state of Connecticut did, and most of the states, just like everything else, like, oh, we're going to allow weed to be legal and we're going to tax it. And it's going to take care of all our problems. Yeah. And just like the tax on alcohol took care of all our problems, and the tax on cigarettes. I have had teenagers here who had 5 figures of debt, lying, saying that they were over 21, gambling, then getting these quick, like they're like payday loans, but they pop up on the phone. Now, luckily, if you can prove your kid's under 21, that they don't hold them accountable for those loans. But this is so much more common than you realize. And like, everybody should know what the gambler's fallacy is, which is the house always wins. Look at Mohegan Sun. Look how beautiful it is. Like, the natives of Connecticut are winning. The gambler's fallacy. Gambling is for people who don't understand math. It really just is a dumb idea. But you have to speak to boys directly about sports betting because it's much more common and frequent than you realize. Okay. So I'm going to wrap up. You guys are great. You've stayed till the end, so we can have a little chit chat now with questions. And with everything we've covered, you may feel overwhelmed, but please stay hopeful. Your son needs and wants your limits and care. Limits are love for teenagers. This culture is vast and scary at times, and he needs you in his corner, looking out for his future self by setting those reasonable limits and enforcing them now. Reassurance goes a whole long way to helping young men know that they're growing and they're not supposed to know what they're going to do with the rest of their lives. And you don't want them to be the next Jeff Bezos because, well, Jeff Bezos is a jerk, if you ask me. And you really, you have faith in them that they're going to figure out what they want to do with their life. And you know what's really powerful, especially dads, sharing stories about times when you were young and struggling and how you overcame it are extremely powerful to your teen. Because they think you arrived, as a CPA in a suit and, in your lovely house in Trumbull. Like, no, you need to tell them the time you screwed up. Tell them the time, like, oh, did Grandpa ever tell you this story when he caught me and my friends drinking? Like, let me tell you. Let me tell you how they handled it back in the day, and this is how I'm going to handle it now. Because parents think if they admit they did stupid things as a teen, it gives their kid the license to do stupid things. No, it's the opposite. The kid's like, oh, really? So like this person I admire, my dad, my uncle, my stepdad, like, oh, he was a teenager too. He struggled with some of these things too. Very powerful. And try to find and nurture like-minded tribes of mean parents such as yourself, because not everybody's letting their kids run amok. And if your teen is not mad at you a few times a week, you're probably slacking off. So hopefully many of you feel very good. And one day your son will thank you for being firm and having rules. He may be 25 years old or God willing, he'll be married with his own teen son and you'll be the grandparent laughing at the table at his tale of woe because you've been there. You guys are great. And if you feel like you're not having an impact, remember, what the wise Dalai Lama said, if you think you're too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito. You just have to keep mosquitoing your son over and over and over and over. It's getting in. And thank you for all you do for your kids every day. And that's it from me. But we will do questions.
Thank you, Liz. I don't see any questions right now, but we will
Okay.
stay
Great.
on for a little bit in case there are any questions. And to those of you who stayed, thank you.
Comments?
And
I
Liz,
don't know
do
if you have any
appreciate it.
comments from what you see in the boys in Trumbull or as a mom of boys or any questions or concerns, or did you want me to get into anything a little bit more?
No, I want to thank you. I think you touched on so many of the topics that parents of boys are dealing with. I mean, I think from working in the community, we see parents coming to us who are definitely the gambling, the sports
Huge.
betting is a real concern.
Huge. Yeah.
Cannabis a real concern. We're super pleased in Trumbull that a lot of our education has worked. So our numbers and our rates are significantly lower than some of the
Oh, that's
data you shared,
awesome.
which is wonderful.
Oh, that's great.
But I will say that the kids that we do find that are using cannabis, we see a higher percentage of the ones that are using struggling because of the high potency
high potency.
marijuana. So
Mhm.
so they're more likely to end up with our juvenile review board because they get caught with it at school, or they get, they find another negative consequence. But the general use rates have continued to decline, and we don't see use in the middle school level, which is a result of a lot of
That's
parent work
wonderful. Well, really
and
good
coalition
work.
work.
Yes. And and partnering with parents, exactly. Because really parents do make a difference. That's why I always emphasize, even if your kid's rolling their eyes or whatever, they're still listening. They are listening. And believe it or not, they want to please you as a parent. They do. It's just you get that weird mix of the teen limbic attitude. And that's why you want to look at, well, what's their compliance? Never mind them rolling their eyes, etc. What's their compliance? Yeah.
We do have one comment
Okay.
one attendee who said, I don't have a question, but since I'm often one of the quote unquote the worst, it's reassuring to know it's because I'm doing something right.
That's right. You certainly are.
So we
applaud you. You're one of the worst. Yeah. Okay. That I would take that as a badge of honor. Just like when my son was with the psycho. I'm like, I'm the psycho. That's right. Yeah.
Definitely. So if we don't have any more
We
questions.
do. There's one more that
Oh.
just popped up. Someone is dealing with heavy gaming. Their son is gaming heavily
Mhm.
and not meeting their friends physically. They're not sure how to change the behavior because the son bought his own PC and doesn't want limits on the gaming time and argues that it's his device.
So I'm pretty sure that the electricity is paid for by you and you own the home. And this is where our generation, like, we've been too accommodating to these kids. Be like, nope, everybody needs time and balance. And oh God, it was so much easier when my kids were all home still. You could just turn off the modem. You could physically turn the modem off, which was fabulous. This is a tough one, but you know what I would say? This sounds like this young man needs some kind of activity out of the home, whether it's even joining, you know what, I've helped a lot of my gaming clients, even if they join like a live like the magic cards are a big thing. Like some comic book stores have like these live gaming events where you play magic, you play other role-playing games. You got to get them out of the house doing something. If he's not a sporty kid and he doesn't want to do, sporting activities, that's fine. But you can let him pick literally anything that he wants, but he has to have some activity other than gaming. And yes, you do have the right to limit the access even to his own computer, because let's just face it, when the computer breaks and he doesn't have the money to fix it, who's going to pay for that? That's going to be you. Who pays for the electricity bill? That's you. Who I'm sure helps and indulges him in so many different ways. That's you. So I love this. Kids will say to me, or even parents will say to me, like, well, they bought the gaming station with their own bar mitzvah money. I'm like, it's okay. You can still take it away, because especially like if your son is not meeting friends, if it's affecting his schoolwork, you could say, hey, the only thing, like this is how I would handle this. Say like, okay, here's the goals this week. The grades have to be to a certain point. You have to have your schoolwork done, and you have to have proposed 2 activities for the weekend that are non-game related. We could go play, the magic tournament. We can go see one of the new movies that's out. You can invite some friends, and the problem is this kind of active parenting to this parent, like it usually involved me and my husband shelling out some money. Like, I'll take you and a couple of the friends that you play online out to a meal together. We'll treat. Like, you got to keep just throwing ideas, like throwing spaghetti at a wall till something sticks. And you got to be insistent. And I can understand it could get exhausting. You just give up. And honestly, I can't really give you an answer about how to take the computer away. Yeah. Oh, he's great. Oh, 6 APs and great students, but no activities. Okay. Well, then, yay, that's good. But just make him do a couple positive things. That's all. I had one like that too. And it was hard because he was such a good kid in so many ways. But you know what I made him do? I made him get a job as a busboy and then a waiter because he really struggled with social skills. That job changed his life. Like, he learned how to do small talk with people, and he made a lot of money because he waited at like kind of a nice restaurant. So maybe even a job. All right, guys. Well, thank you. I love speaking in Trumbull. You guys have been lovely. Hope this is helpful. Hope if you see the video, it's helpful. Stay firm, stay calm, stay mean, stay psycho, the worst, whatever it is that your kid calls you. We support you in that endeavor.
Thank you. Have a wonderful night.